It all starts with a question. How do you find information about sex? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm Peter, and this is Lindsay,
hi.
and this is Stacks and Facts.
Yay, we did it!
Yeah! So today, as you can see, we are doing a thing that is different. This different thing is that we are having a guest person, and this guest person is Dr. Lindsey Doe, clinical sexologist and host of the YouTube channel Sexplanations, which you should go watch. Probably you've already seen, but go watch it some more. And this is Lena. Hi, Lena.
Cue dog.
Hi. Lindsay is a clinical sexologist and does all kinds of things that help people find information about sex. And so I figured it would be worth it to talk to her about what that looks like and how people go about doing that and how she, as a professional, does that for herself and for others.
Ooh, thanks.
Hey, no problem. Okay, so my first question for you is how have you found that people go about finding information about sex throughout the course of their lives? And does that maybe change on like where they are?
Yes, it changes depending on where they are, and they usually go find it from their community members, peers, teachers, resources like the internet, magazines, television, radio, etc. And I think that's why people with disabilities are so important to me, because they have less access to that. If they're constantly being supervised by a caregiver, or if they have limitations to their ability to hear or see things that their peers are exchanging, then they're limited in their sexual education.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, because a lot of the times when we think about sex ed, so we think about institutional sex ed, I think a lot of the time. So like the stuff that you get in school or the stuff that you get, well, yeah, in school typically. Is
And
the
I didn't
only
even
place.
list that.
You kind of did. But we don't often think about those other things, the things that you did list. Like the fact that a lot of times when we get education about sex or when we get information about sex, whether it's reliable or not, it tends to come from like our friends. There was this great podcast, or I don't know if it was a podcast, it was probably just like This American Life, that was talking about how boys, as they are hitting puberty, rely on each other for information about sex as if they're the experts, which I think is hilarious. But I feel like that probably has certain negative impacts on how people then decide to go and get sex continuing on in their lives as they get older.
We're having an animal menagerie here.
It's fine. Everything's fine. Lindsay has animals. So you just talked about how like folks with disabilities have all of these issues where they don't have nearly as many resources to get good information about sex and about sexuality. What other barriers do you think exist out there for when people want to learn about this fairly important topic?
So I think that it applies to all isolated groups, individuals. If they don't have a community around them that's exchanging things like inside jokes or double entendre, etc., they miss out on a lot of nuanced sex education, and the resources available to them would be people like you, other individuals that are really striving to disseminate information either via libraries or the internet. YouTube is such a valuable resource. What I provide online is a channel called Sexplanations that gives accessible, free education that's comprehensive to anyone else who is able to log on. I also think that talking with a trusted adult rather than a peer who's flying by the seat of their pants is a way to go. But there are peers who are educated, and they can do that through groups like Planned Parenthood or a local nonprofit organization or for-profit organization that specializes in sexual health and wellness.
Nice. Yeah, I really like the fact that you mentioned trusted adults, because when I first started my program back in last year, I designed a research study that evaluated how libraries could help with sex education specifically. And in the process of it was pretty great. In the process of doing that, I did my annotated bib, and one of the papers that I found it looked at how kids rated the reliability of sources of information for sex ed. Yeah, and so even though kids, like, you ask them, and like as a child or like a young adult, you might be like, I would never go to my parents for sex. It turns out that most kids actually really believe the stuff that their parents tell them. And they see their parents as one of like the trusted sources for good sex education. So if you're a parent, have that talk with your kid, hey?
Hey?
So in thinking about looking for information about sex ed, what are some barriers that exist that you think maybe people don't realize exist while they're going looking for it?
I mean, the most obvious is that it's not there. Someone has put up a political structure to prevent access, that it's not accurate, or worse, that it's false, that someone is actively lying to them. Part of me thinks that almost our entire culture is a barrier to sex education. This idea of modesty is something I've been thinking a lot about as a barrier. Why do we have modesty? How does that serve us now? I want us to live in a culture that can give ourselves compliments and have a high self-esteem, and for that to not be shameful, because I also think that then we can have conversations about our poop and our vaginas and just openly discuss our bodies and our experiences, so that then we all have this hydraulic lift of improvement, rather than the shame and secrecy that keep us afraid that our bodies or our personalities aren't normal and lovable.
Definitely. And I think that's a major thing, like for me in my own like belief system, the importance of information and the role that it plays in public health, for example. Like people think that medicine is all about like taking a pill or getting enough exercise or things like these. But I think another important part of it is like having the information and being able to and willing to find the information that you need so that you know what to do to take care of yourself. Like if we can get ourselves to talk about sex, and I say this all the time, I said it on your podcast the other day, it's important to have people that you can talk about sex with in an environment where you're not actually having sex.
Right.
Because it helps normalize the idea that this is a thing that people do. And so when it comes time, like you find a weird spot on your penis, you feel comfortable going to your doctor and saying, hey doc, I have this spot on my penis and I don't know what it is. Or if you have really intense cramps, or if you perhaps are having your first period and you don't know who to talk about that with. Like when other people talk about it, when you see other people talk about it and they model that good behavior, subjective term, but it's fine. Like it gives them permission to talk about things like that, which I think helps with the information seeking process.
What do you think are the barriers?
I think the majority of the barriers that I really care about are institutionalized. So, for example, a place in a particular part of the U.S. Where they say that you can only teach these methods of contraception, and that other methods are either not reliable, and they teach that it's less reliable than it actually is, or that it is inherently wrong to use contraception. Even though we know that, like, when you provide people with contraception, so many other things in their lives go right. Because I think things like that, when you have a really bad foundation, a fundamental foundation of knowledge for sex ed, it makes a domino effect. So if the parents don't know the good sex ed, the kids aren't going to learn it either, if we already know that those are the sources that they trust for it. But that's why I think YouTube's great, because you get to address the shortcomings, and I get to address the shortcomings. And like folks like Hannah Witten and
Stevie Bobby. Shannon Boodram.
They contribute to a body of alternate sources of information. So that's pretty cool. Now, as an educator, how do you go about finding information about sex and sexuality? Particularly now that you're not, because you had been in academia, but now that you're not, how do you stay up to date? How do you go and find more information?
The comment section of my videos is a really good place, actually, to have that dialogue where I am learning and they are learning. Paulo Freire, depending on how you pronounce it, wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he said that the best education style is when the teacher and the student are both learning. And I really value that problem posing, let's keep growing. So it's not necessarily coming from textbooks or research. It's coming from a lot of human experiences, people pushing on me saying, that's not how my body looks, or that's not how my body works. And then I can do some investigation and find out, okay, what is the science behind this? What is the research saying? How do we triangulate that so that it's not just the quantitative study or the qualitative study, but it's also the human being and then my own experiential knowledge. Triangulate, pull it all in.
For sure. And I really like that you mentioned that idea of privileging the voices of the folks that you're teaching to, or even teaching about. So in my program at UBC, we talk a lot about, like, we have a concentration, a curriculum concentration called the First Nations curriculum concentration. And I think that's really valuable, especially for a program like information studies, where we are so wrapped up in academia at looking at the, for lack of a better term at the moment, Western way of thinking about things, that we don't really like consider even the fact that people conceptualize things very differently in different cultures. A great example that comes to mind that isn't necessarily sex ed related, but there's this, so everyone knows Dewey Decimal. That's what you go to a library and you see the Dewey Decimal System as a way to classify information and the holdings of a library. If you go to a university, you'll see that it's classified by Library of Congress classification system.
Okay.
Now you know.
Now I know.
But both of these were made by like old white dudes in the prime of their lives, and it privileges the information that they had to work with while they were developing their collections. But those aren't the only classification systems that exist. Recently, like in the past, I want to say 30 years, there's been the system called the Huihua classification system. And that has developed to help organize information according to indigenous perspectives. So,
cool.
Yeah, so instead of organizing things like according to, say, oh, it's a science, or it's an art, or it's a alphabet, or it's a piece of literature, instead you look at perhaps the people that the information comes from first, or you look at the geographic area or the territory where the information comes from. Because if you're looking for information about, indigenous rights and cultures and things like that, that's going to be a more important first step that you take.
That's so cool.
Right? So at some point I'm going to talk to somebody about that, hopefully on this channel, because it's so interesting and I cannot do it justice. And also I probably shouldn't speak for them. I'd rather provide them a platform. But yeah, so there's things like that. So when you say you go to the comment section and you see what people are saying as like kind of a first step, I think that's super important. So yay. Now that you're not in academia, what are some barriers that you see when you try and find information for your profession or for this field?
I think even when I was in academia, the problems were that the research wasn't complete, or the research wasn't thorough, or it was questionable. And I don't think that even this sample size of 10,000 people speaks for every individual on the planet. And so I just learned from the get-go that relying on the articles and the journals was not the way to go, that I had to be talking to the people and I had to be on the ground working and learn that way. So I guess the barriers are that we're human beings and we can only take in and disseminate so much. And so I think the greatest message that I try to give is teaching people how to learn so that they're constantly in a state of curiosity and pushing what they know to be more or to be different or to be better, so that no one is in this stagnant space of, I know that this body has these parts and that is that. And instead we push ourselves to have this lifelong exploration of sexuality or whatever the discipline is.
Do you have any like special recommendations that you can give to folks who want to learn more about sex and sexuality that they might not think of off the bat?
Sexplanations.
That's right.
youtube.com/sexplanations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are many resources. You can go to the library. They usually have a sexuality section. You can go to bookstores in that way, online. If it's not through YouTube, there are also websites and blogs. And at universities, they often have lectures that you can attend for free, regardless of whether or not you're a student or faculty or staff. So many resources.
Go check out your wellness center at your school too, or like the nurse's office or things like that. UBC, for example, this is the shameless plug, has a great wellness center, and if you go there, you'll find me maybe. Okay, anyways, that's it. Thank you so much for doing this.
You're so welcome.
If you want to find more of Lindsey, check out her channel, like she just plugged, Sexplanations. Also, there's a podcast, which is great. I personally think that lots of the people who have been on it and who will be on it, who are me and also not me, are excellent and very entertaining. So yeah, all right, that's it. What's my sign off? Oh, until next time, don't forget to ask questions. And
Don't forget to ask questions.
stay curious.
And stay curious.
Yeah! See how I did that? Because they're related. Okay, bye y'all.